2024 was much more pared back in terms of Beards and Cars reviews. Of course, I only did 6 in the entire year, which is nowhere near any of the years prior, aside from maybe the first year back in 2019. But to be honest, it was a combination of two things. One, YouTube is kind of burying these videos, which is a shame because it's by far my favourite thing to do on the channel, but there you go, you can't really do anything about that. The second reason is because I've been much busier outside of YouTube, so those two things coming together have meant it's been very much so pared back. Funnily enough though, we've actually featured more classics this year than we usually would, which has been kind of cool. Now, although I've reviewed 6, I'm of course not doing a top 10, but I'm not doing a top 6 either, for two reasons. One, that's a bit of a weird number to do, so we're just doing a top 5, and secondly, because the car that would be in number 6 doesn't even deserve to be on the list, at least in its initial form, because number 6 would have been my Mark 1 Rolls-Royce Silver Shadow. I'm not even going to talk about it anymore in the video. If you want to know why, you can go and check out that very in-depth reasoning that I did in its own review. To start off properly though with number 5, this one of course in a busier year, again would not even feature on the list, but it was actually a great little car, and it is of course the Toyota Starlet, which myself and my girlfriend hired in South Africa for about a week. It was a fantastic little car in a completely unassuming kind of way, and like I said, it wouldn't be on any normal list, but of course it deserves to be here because it was definitely better than the Rolls in its standard form, which is crazy to say. Of course, it's not going to rate any higher, and that wouldn't really surprise anyone. In number 4, I'm putting finally experiencing the hype, is it justified? It could be, of the E30 generation BMW 3 Series. The one that I drove was a 4-door. It was actually a neighbour of mine who offered me to review his car, and it was only a 320i. He was actually selling it on after doing a bit of renovation work on it. Like I said, it's not a car that's going to blow your mind in any particular way, but it was very cool to finally experience what people rave about, because even standard 3 Series from the E30 shape go for pretty hefty amounts of cash these days. That particular one sold after doing the video, of course, and it was, as I said, a pleasant car to drive. It had a charm to it. I like the satisfying feel that an older classic will have sometimes in terms of switchgear and door locks and everything. It has more of a satisfying feel to it than modern cars, which feel more often than not a bit tinny. And it's funny because sometimes an older car might actually be smaller and lighter, but yet somehow has more of a feel of quality in a weird kind of way. And even though it wasn't a quick version, you could definitely feel the underpinnings of what would make that such a good platform to work with, from some rallying to, of course, famously touring car racing, even more famously the M3 Road version, which commands ridiculous money these days. So yeah, it was a pleasant experience. Again, a car which probably wouldn't feature in a top 10 usually, but I definitely would put it in number 4 for this particular year. Moving up into 3rd, this might be surprising given what my 2nd and 1st place picks are though, the quickest car which I drove this year, and funnily enough, it's actually the slowest version of this particular car, and it's taken me this long to finally review one, the base version, the original base version from the earlier 2000s of the Bentley Continental GT. Of course, I've owned them in the past. I had a Flying Spur, which is the 4-door. I've reviewed the Super Sport, I've reviewed the Speed, open top, closed top, and now with this one finally covering the original, where it all began. It's a car which has a reputation. They are notorious for being very touchy to live with. Certainly in the case of mine, I didn't have it for very long, and it's absolutely true that they can have plenty of issues, which is exactly why I said in its review, and there are links right down below in the description if you want to check out any of the 6, which I did in 2024. I believe if you're going to get a Bentley, or if you're into the idea of a Continental, you're actually better off getting one in the lower price end of the range, because you are going to have problems no matter what. So either you need to go much newer, where they're just better in general, or go for an older shape, but go really cheap. Because at least if you go cheap, you're not going to be A, surprised if you have any issues, and B, it's not really going to matter if you lose money on it. If you can afford to run something like this in the first place, then chances are you can probably afford to lose a bit of money, either in maybe parting it out afterwards, or trading down for a different car that's more reliable. Kind of what I did basically, to just have the ownership experience, but not necessarily keep it forever. Of course, many people aren't in the financial position to be able to do that, and I certainly didn't intend to do that with mine, which is why it really annoyed me. But ultimately, having that Bentley, it was still a cool 2 months or so that I had it for, and then moving on from that Bentley to part exchanging it, even in broken condition, for a much better Golf R32. Well, that ended up being one of the best cars I've ever had. So even sometimes a bad car experience can lead into a good one. Now though, we get to the part which was most difficult to decide, my number 1 and number 2 picks, because both of these you could easily make an argument for being car of the year this year. On the one hand, you have a classic, which I purchased because my girlfriend really loved it and thought it would suit me, a fantastic little car in its own way, and the other one is a car which I wanted to review more so because I just hadn't driven one yet and didn't really care too much about. So to spoil it, in second place is my Toyota Celica, a 1978 XT2000. I had the liftback form in particular, and like I said, I bought it because my girlfriend liked it. I actually spotted a couple of them for sale at the same time, and there's only a handful of these in the UK anyway. I spotted a yellow one from Arizona, mint condition, a lot more expensive than mine though, it was like $7,000. Went to look at it, it was having a lot of trouble just idling properly, and it had clearly been sat for far too long, so I kind of thought, forget that idea. But then we saw this one, she liked this one more, and it was cheaper. It was like $4,500, not mint by any means, it had a ripped seat and a little bit of bubbling on the bodywork, but mechanically it was sound. I preferred the look of this one as well, and I just went for it. I didn't end up keeping the car for too long. I sold it for almost the same amount that I paid, like $4,250, where I paid $4,500, so I didn't lose too much, and I sold it to a guy who'd never had a classic before, and that is exactly what I said in the thumbnail of the video. You can see it in the thumbnail of this video. It could well be a perfect first classic car, and I think that the guy who had it will probably enjoy it more than I did, and probably keep it for longer, which of course begs the question, if you don't have it anymore, and if you didn't have it for very long, well, why is it on the list, and why is it so high? Well, simply put, because it is a fantastic, charming, pleasant, super reliable, surprisingly robust little classic car, but it's not loud, it's not over the top, it's not special enough, and it's not wacky enough to keep my attention. So I'm not the kind of person who buys stuff like, Morris Minors and classic minis and just toddles around in a nice little classic. They're all well and good, but that's never really been my style. I'm more the kind of person to have a big old patinaed V8 muscle car, as I do, or a crazy project of some kind. Not really a mint little classic that you don't want to do anything to because you wouldn't want to ruin it. That's not really my style. For the kind of person who does want a classic like that though, I would say it's probably one of the best cars you could get if, and here's the crucial thing, you can find one, because they are pretty rare, which of course leaves number one. Again, in a normal year, this would not be my number one. I'm kind of glad that this year was a little bit pared down, because it gives a car like this much more of a chance to get Car of the Year, as I am giving it, than it would usually have. And honestly, it deserves to have that kind of attention, because not only did this car deliver what I would hope for from a top-tier BMW, because it is of course the 7 Series, it was actually better than I expected it to be. For under $6,000, and even with reasonably high motorway miles, it drove like a car which had 100,000 less miles on it. The interior, the bodywork, everything about it just felt so much better than most cars would with that kind of mileage. The performance wasn't quick in a traditional sense, but it was quick enough for what it was, a 250 or so horsepower car with about 400 foot-pounds of torque, I believe in that region if I recall correctly. So perfect towing vehicle, for example, with that kind of torque. Great fuel economy, of course being a 730D in particular. And again, for under $6,000, you could spend, however much for a Bentley and have loads of issues, or you could spend like $5,000 or $6,000 on a luxury car like this, or, a Lexus or an S-Class, have a really cool experience, even with higher mileage. Because as I alluded to in its review, the difference between one of these and another car, say a performance car with the equivalent mileage, is that you know that a performance car's been ragged. If you find a car like this with high mileage, well, chances are it's probably been owned by somebody who was driving to the office and back on a motorway commute of some kind, or just as a work daily driver for some executive. That's a pretty easy life, all things considered. It's probably also the kind of previous owner who would have kept it serviced and kept it in good condition. So yes, they're cheap, and yes, that mileage may be high, and yes, there are a lot of things that could go wrong, but the difference is a car like this, I would argue, doesn't tend to go wrong as much. It's just an unfortunate fact. Well, fortunate and unfortunate depending on which end of the market you're on. If you're trying to sell one, then it's unfortunate because they don't keep any value, but if you're looking for a bargain on the buying side, well, they're great, because this, as I said, a Lexus and various others, you can get so much car for the money, and crucially, they're not cars like Bentleys and Rolls Royces, which are really expensive to run in terms of economy and tax as well. They're way better, particularly in terms of fuel. So like I said earlier on, virtually none of these cars would have been in my usual top 10 had the year been more busy. At least it gives some cars which usually wouldn't have had as much attention a bit more of a chance to shine. Moving forward into 2025, I do plan to do more, of course. I would like to do more reviews as well. I certainly don't plan on stopping, but realistically, not much will probably change in terms of how often that happens, because as I said, I'm busy outside of YouTube. These videos just don't do very well, especially on the main channel, which is a shame, but that's just how the algorithm treats me. So unfortunately, I don't have much choice in that regard. Of course, if you haven't checked out the previous Car of the Year winners, you can find all of those in the main playlist for Beards and Cars reviews, and I'll see you in 2025 with more. But for now, thanks for watching.